This week on Q&A, investigative journalist Edward J. Epstein. Mr. Epstein discusses his book, How America Lost Its Secrets, Edward Snowden, the Man and the Theft.
Edward J. Epstein, in your opinion, why didn't President Obama pardon Edward Snowden?
President Obama, in this case, was the man who knew too much. Unlike the world of journalism, the world of presidents, they have access to the findings of our own intelligence community, the CIA, the NSA, the FBI. So he knew without a doubt that Snowden was lying when he claimed that the U.S. government, and specifically Obama, had trapped him in Moscow. He knew that Snowden was lying when he said he had no contact with Russian intelligence. He knew that Snowden was lying when Snowden said he had only taken whistleblowing documents since he had the damage report. So given those facts, there would be almost no reason, not even compassion because the man isn't in prison, no reason for him to give him a pardon, and he did not give him a pardon.
Your book, called How America Lost Its Secrets, The Man and the Theft, Edward Snowden. When did you get interested in doing this story?
I've always been interested in espionage. I temporarily interrupted my interest when the Cold War ended, when suddenly it was announced that someone had stolen communication secrets. In fact, Snowden admitted it on video, so it wasn't a whodunit, and went to Russia. And this interested me because it was a potential, I stress the word potential, espionage case. So I became interested in 2013, shortly after the theft.
How many different countries did you go to do this story?
We won't count Hawaii as a country, but it was important. Japan, where Snowden had worked. Hawaii, which was the scene of the crime. Russia, of course, where he ended up. So I would say 3 different countries.
As you know, a lot of reviewers there's a whole group of people that do not think you've done a fair job. They think you're biased. I've got right here the front page of the book review in the New York Times by Nick Lemon, and he basically, I don't know if it's fair to say it this way, he says you don't know what you're talking about. What's going on here with all these journalists that are negative to this book?
Well, you know, for the past 5 decades, I've been concerned with a single issue: how unverified information becomes established as conventional wisdom. Started with the Warren Commission, went on through the Black Panthers, my book News from Nowhere, and of course Soviet disinformation. But in all these years, I have never seen a case where, the Snowden case, where so uncritically journalists have accepted information from a single source, Edward Snowden, who is in Moscow under the control of the Russian government. So what I am doing here is questioning the validity of that single source. Since so many journalists have tied their reputations, the author of that review was the head of the Pulitzer Prize committee that gave Pulitzer Prizes to Gelman and Poitras. There's a reaction to me that what business do you have disturbing the peace? What business do you have saying that the conventional knowledge is wrong? And, they have a perfect right to question my facts, to even question my motives. But my motive is very clear. I'm doing exactly what the New York Times reviewer, Nick Lemon, says I'm doing. I'm not taking at face value the story of Edward Snowden, and I'm basically looking to what the government, which has access to information that journalists don't, what the government has found about Snowden.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is this a case where the liberal point of view says he's a whistleblower and the conservative point of view says he committed treason?
Well, there's some sort of rift here, a great divide. I'm not sure it's only the liberals. I think journalism has gone beyond being liberal right-wing. I think there's a libertarian streak, a privacy streak, and even now a commitment to journalism as a religious institution where you have to have faith in other journalists. And if journalists win the Pulitzer Prize, you have to assume that they somehow know what they're talking about, even though, and I'm trying to say, that basically the emperor wore no clothes, that all these journalists, Poitras, Gelman, Greenwald, all of them had only a single source, other than the documents. The documents Snowden provided, of course, are legitimate. But aside from that, the narrative comes entirely from Snowden.
What do you think of him?
Of Snowden? I think he was a disgruntled employee who didn't like the NSA. He was working for a private company who started more or less like he said he started. He held little anti-surveillance parties in Hawaii, got angrier and angrier, and left with the documents, wound up in a situation in Hong Kong where his only escape route was to Russia. He went to Russia. He was in the palm of the Russian intelligence service's hands. When they have someone in their palm, they're going to squeeze them. That's what they do. And that's what we do, by the way, in a reverse situation. So that's, I don't, I never interviewed Snowden, not that that would help. And I only know the same things that are in video clips of him that everyone else has seen.
How hard did you try to interview him?
I went to Moscow twice. I met with his lawyer in Moscow, Anatoly Kocherina, who was very helpful, but said Ben Wisner, his ACLU lawyer in America, held the keys to seeing Snowden. I went to Wisner. I wrote to Wisner. And he said that Snowden declined to see me. So that's as far as I went.
When all this became public in The Guardian, The Washington Post, there was a video made of Snowden, an interview. Let's watch a little bit of this so people that haven't paid that close attention can see what he sounded like back in 2013.
My name's Ed Snowden. I'm 29 years old. I work for Booz Allen Hamilton as an infrastructure analyst for NSA in Hawaii.
What are some of the positions that you held previously within the intelligence community?
I've been a systems engineer, systems administrator, senior advisor for the Central Intelligence Agency, solutions consultant, and a telecommunications information systems officer.
Go back to who is this fellow?
Well, even in a clip that we've just seen, he tells a lie. He says he was a senior advisor to the CIA. What he was a communications officer, what's called a tech, who worked at the CIA for 2 years and who actually was forced out. He was not a senior advisor, but that's not my complaint. The interesting thing about this video is he made it. If Snowden had gone directly to Moscow, or any person who steals intelligence had gone directly to Moscow, no one would pay much attention. The narrative would be established. A U.S. intelligence worker steals secrets, goes to Moscow. But he stopped in Hong Kong and made this video, thus supplying, just as we've seen, an alternative video where he himself, the self-interested party, of course, identifies himself as a whistleblower. And from this video and from the stories he told to Poitras and Greenwald, and I think they honestly reported what he said. I have no complaints against the journalist. They took their single source. It was a great story. They ran with it because the government did not immediately respond. The government was shell-shocked, I have to say. It did not immediately respond. Or where it responded, people found it not credible, the government. They didn't like the U.S. government. At that point, this story became established. This is the way he established his narrative.
How did he move? How much did he move out of the database at the NSA, and how did he do it?
Well, despite what Snowden says, and despite what his supporters say based on what he says, he removed 1.5 million documents, a vast catch of secret documents. The way I know this is in the report of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, signed by all the Democrats and all the Republicans. These members of this commission had only one source, essentially, and that was the U.S. intelligence community. They read the damage reports. Okay, so that's my source. Now, more interesting question is, what was the intelligence, the damage assessments based on? Each compartment from which Snowden stole information had a log. And the log said when he copied a document, when he selected a document, and when he moved a document. So that's how they know the minimum number of documents he moved. But where he was working, and he changed jobs to work here, where he was working, he had what's called a thin computer. That's a computer without any storage capabilities and without any ports, so you can't make copies because it was such a high security facility he was working at. So he had to move the information with this workstation to a server, and from that server where he erased the data, he then had to move it, or tried to reverse, because they reconstructed with forensic tools, to another computer which was approximately 20 miles away where he had previously worked, to a thick computer which had ports so he could make thumb drives or external drives. So the NSA, or actually the Department of Defense, which had a much more intensive investigation than the NSA, was basically able to trace the movement of his information, how much he moved, and how much he removed from one computer to another. And that's how they come to the 1.5 million number.
How did he pick Bart Gellman of the Post, Laura Poitras, who did the documentary, and Glenn Greenwald, who wrote for The Guardian, lived at, I believe, in Brazil? How did he pick those people to release this to?
Well, he wrote to Laura Poitras, who had been making anti-NSA films, and said, "You've selected yourself because of the work you've done." So he picked them because he knew they would be on his side. He knew that they were all courageous reporters. Laura Poitras basically made films of what she found, and she believed that she was under surveillance, with good reason possibly. And Glenn Greenwald was her friend, became her co-author, co-writer. He also wrote polemics about the NSA. And Bart Gellman, who won a Pulitzer Prize, who's a respected reporter, also had been writing about surveillance. So he picked three people who he knew would be sympathetic to what he was about to do. And let me say, in his first communications with them, he lied to them. He said he was a government employee, which he was not, who was a senior member of the intelligence community, which he was not. He didn't belong. 17 agencies make up the intelligence community, and he didn't belong to any of them. He was, at the time he wrote them, a system administrator working for Dell Secure Works, an outside contractor for the NSA.
Let's introduce, and now for discussion, the three people that were involved, Bart Gellman, Laura Poitras, and Glenn Greenwald. This is from a New York Times hosted Skype discussion among those three. Here's a clip first of Bart Gellman, who was with the Washington Post, did get a Pulitzer Prize, is no longer there, but is writing a book about the same subject that you did. Let's watch.
Why is he in Russia? He's in Russia because sometime between the time he was boarding the flight to Latin America, where he was going to transit Russia, at the time he arrived in Russia, the United States government canceled his passport, making him, for travel purposes, a stateless person. As far as the security threat, he deliberately did not bring, not only did he not bring any of the documents with him to Russia, for the express purpose of making sure that he could not be compelled to disclose them. He didn't bring any of his, he didn't bring any means of obtaining those documents.
I'm going to read you some of this, but I'm holding some tweets back in early January from Barton Gellman about your book. Have you read those, by the way?
No, I don't do Twitter.
No, these are quite critical. But first of all, what's your reaction? He was talking about things that you dispute.
This is a very good illustration of the Snowden narrative. Snowden destroyed all his material before he went to Russia. Snowden didn't transfer any material to the cloud or anything. Snowden gave the Russians nothing. This all comes, and it could only epistemologically come from a single source, and that's Snowden. Okay? Now, Gellman is repeating what Snowden said. What I found is the opposite. I'll give you 4 bits of evidence that are direct evidence. We may not believe them, but they come from witnesses. First, Vladimir Putin. He says Snowden had contacted Russian diplomats, whatever diplomat means to Putin, Russian diplomats in Hong Kong before Putin authorized him to come, Snowden to come to Russia, which meant he was in contact with Russian officials. Secondly, Anatoly Kucherini, who said, when asked whether Snowden had given all his documents to journalists in Hong Kong, said no, he gave only some of them. And then when asked whether Snowden had he was in Moscow at the time, he brought documents to Moscow, or whether he had them in Moscow, undisclosed documents, which means secret documents, or secret material, I should be precise. Kucherina answered certainly. Thirdly...
Kucherina is his lawyer.
I'm sorry, Anatoly Kucherina is his lawyer.
Snowden's lawyer. And
thirdly, the deputy head of the Russian Parliament committee that oversees intelligence, Franz Klitsevich, said Snowden shared his intelligence with his information with Russian intelligence, and he said that's what intelligence services do. I think he was correct. And finally, we have the House Select Committee report, which says very unambiguously that Snowden was in contact with Russian intelligence after he arrived in Moscow and continues to be in contact with them. And this report was declassified on December 22nd, 2016. Whatever Snowden brought or didn't bring to Moscow, he had secrets in his head. He said he did. He told James Reisner in the New York Times that he had secrets that if he wanted to disclose could make the NSA go dark. He told the same thing to Gellman and everyone else. So he had secrets in his head. The Russians knew he had secrets in his head. So the assertion that he gave nothing to the Russians, the assertion we've seen in that video, comes from Snowden. And I don't believe Snowden.
Where is he right now?
Snowden is in Moscow at an undisclosed location under the protection of the Russian government.
Bart Gellman in his tweets, I'll read you a couple of them. This is on January the 1st, I believe, yes. I won't try to address every bizarro claim, talking about your book. No time, space, or inclination. Past a certain point, bad faith work doesn't merit the effort.
Well, the ad hominem attacks, I really can't say very much about. Gellman basically has almost a religious commitment to his faith in the person who gave him this Pulitzer Prize, as does Greenwald. They believe in him. And when you argue it with someone with faith, you're automatically wrong because you're violating what they have faith in. Faith and evidence are two different categories. And I think this has become with them a religious matter. Anyone who contradicts Snowden, even the House Intelligence Committee, even though it was signed by all the Democrats, Gelman also attacked them with the same vicious comments.
Yeah, he says clearly that it was an awful report.
He said that even before they declassified the report, when they just declassified on September 15th, the summary of the report, having not read the report, he attacked it with the same slurs that he attacked me with.
Here's a specific. You can answer this one. He says in another tweet, yet Snowden, Epstein's book says, reached unreachable level 3 secrets that only a spy could want. There is no such category at the NSA as level 3. And in your book you say level 1, level 2, level 3. And he's saying there's no such thing.
This comes from the former director of the NSA and a former director of intelligence, Michael McConnell, who's the vice chairman of Booz Allen, from a piece in the Wall Street Journal in which he said there are 4 levels. The first level is administrative documents. The second level is documents or material from which the source has been removed, which is what they circulate. Third level, I call it level 3, but he might call it the third level, the third tier, is information that still has the sources included in them. And the fourth level, he says, is so secret, this is McConnell, that he cannot say in the Wall Street Journal what it is. So there is level 3, whether it's called tier 3, third tier, anyhow.
Before I show a clip of Glenn Greenwald talking, what harm has the release of all this done? What specific harm has it done to this country or people?
Well, two different worlds. In the world of intelligence, 1.5 million documents were removed. 58,000 of them, roughly, were given to journalists. We really don't know what happened to the rest, whether he gave them to the Russians, whether the Chinese made copies of them while he was in Hong Kong. We just don't know. When intelligence is compromised, the danger is not that they'll shut down the channel, but they'll use the channel to tell you misinformation. Be it as if the mafia found out that the FBI was tapping a phone, it wouldn't unplug the phone, because then they would tap another phone, it would keep talking over it. So the damage is much harder to assess in the intelligence world. The second world is the world of counterterrorism. And there we can assess the damage. One of the programs, it's called 702 or PRISM, one of the programs basically was intercepting the internet, the foreign internet abroad, while it was still unencrypted. The way they were able to do that is the structure of the internet takes about 90% of the material through the United States on the way to internet companies like Google or Facebook or Twitter or whatever. And those companies then encrypt it. But before it gets to them, it's in plain text. And the NSA was intercepting those. It intercepted communications between bomb makers in Pakistan and between operatives in America who were going to set off the bombs. One example I give is a Pakistan bomb maker communicating with an American of Afghan descent in Colorado who were planning to blow up Penn Station, Grand Central Station, on September 11th, 2009. This information was, of course, shared with the FBI, and the guy, Zazi was his name, was arrested before he could detonate the bomb. Now, that tragedy, that bloodbath, was averted because the program was still secret. They didn't know that their messages were being intercepted in this way. Once Snowden publicly revealed it, and he revealed it in the video in Hong Kong that we've seen here, once he revealed it, then, of course, they switched to end-to-end encryption. They began encrypting it the moment it was sent from their phone to the moment it was received by the operative. So now the NSA and all its allies and British intelligence and German intelligence lost the capability of finding out in advance what terrorists were up to. So that damage can be measured. The damage to intelligence can't be measured.
Here's Glenn Greenwald from the same conversation that was held through the New York Times.
The reason why 9 or 10 months into the story, we published many hundreds of top secret documents, but not all of the ones in our possession, is because we're constantly engaged, as our source demanded we do, in that analytical process of what not only is newsworthy, but will avoid harming innocent people. And I think we've done a very good job of that, and I say us collectively in the media who have been reporting on these stories, and the proof is that there is zero evidence, not a little bit, but zero, that a single story that emanated from the Snowden materials has caused harm to any individual or endangered national security in any way. All we get are the very familiar, vague, scripted rituals that government officials always use when they have unwanted transparency, but nothing specific or concrete about any harm being done.
Sir.
What Glenn Greenwald is saying is that the documents they published did not in any way compromise any intelligence operations. Lawfare, a very respected blog, which is partly sponsored by Brookings Institute, Lawfare found that that wasn't true, that they had compromised military secrets, agents' names, that they had blown ongoing operations, given away bases, compromised allies like the British intelligence service, Israeli intelligence service, and that can be found on the Lawfare blog, which went through those stories. I would answer very simply myself that by compromising the PRISM program, the program called 702, because that's the part of the national of the FISA Act that it refers that refers to Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act that refers to, they basically compromised the entire war on terrorism. Although I'm not sure Glenn Greenwald did, maybe he's being accurate, because Snowden had compromised it in his video from Hong Kong. So I wouldn't attribute it to Greenwald. And look, I think Greenwald's doing what he says he's doing. He's publishing documents that he thinks expose secrets. I'm not blaming him for doing that. I don't blame Assange. Once documents get leaked, get stolen, in this case, and given to journalists, I think that we accept that journalists will publish them, even if it's BuzzFeed publishing some dossier from undisclosed source. That's what journalists do, they publish. That's what Greenwald did, he published. I have no objection to what Greenwald did.
Glenn Greenwald lives, I believe, in Brazil, doesn't he? But he writes for the Guardian newspaper in London. Is he an American?
Glenn Greenwald is an American lawyer. He, for his own personal reasons, moved to Brazil. He is, I believe, still based there. I'm not sure he's still writing for The Guardian. He has his own new website, I guess, called Intercept, financed by an internet billionaire. And I think he's spent most of his articles are published on The Intercept.
Did you talk to him for this book?
No, I never spoke to him.
The next person is Laura Poitras. Do you know anything about her background?
I know a good deal about Laura Poitras' background. She is a documentary filmmaker who, during the Iraq War, was unfairly suspected of collaborating with the Iraqi extremists or Al-Qaeda. I don't think she was. And then she was on watch lists and was tracked, and she got more and more concerned about the security of herself. She was spending maybe 5 years on a project to investigate the NSA, and she made a documentary which I've seen and like, called Citizen 4, and I think her documentary honestly reflected what Snowden said. I think it was fairly edited, and I think she deserved the Oscar she won.
This is from 2015 from the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and a little bit of Citizen 4, the documentary, and then remarks from her.
I ask only that you ensure this information makes it home to the American public. Thank you, and be careful. Citizen 4.
I work for...
Sorry, I don't know who your name is.
Oh, sorry. My name is Edward Snowden. I go by Ed.
Were you suspicious of the sender of the emails in the beginning?
No, I mean, I thought at first I knew that if it was legitimate, that it was going to be dangerous for the source, and that I had to be really careful.
And you literally said, "Are you trying to trick me?"
Yeah, I said, how do I know this isn't entrapment? How do I know you're for real? How do I know you're not crazy?
What did she prove in the documentary?
Well, the documentary, she used her emails Snowden sent her. And in those emails, he begins by lying to her that he's a government employee. In those emails, you could see him manipulating her by saying, "You are under surveillance," and how the NSA works. And in those emails, she shows how she contacted Greenwald and Gelman. She put together what later became his network at his instructions. She didn't do anything. And then she explains how they came to Hong Kong and how they interviewed him. And basically what you provided was his alternative narrative. It's a narrative I don't accept because it comes from a single source, and the single source went to Russia.
You open up your book, among other things, with a quote from Dostoevsky.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, because, in Dostoevsky, someone who begins as a critic of his government winds up committing a horrible crime, murder, and it's done incrementally, as opposed to that he ever planned to do it, and his anger at the system becomes such that innocent people suffer.
That quote is, "There are certain persons who have a perfect right to commit breaches of morality and crimes. The law is not for them."
Right. Well, that's the position of Snowden and the position of Greenwald and Gelman, that a single person, in this case Snowden, is justified in making the decision in what information will be secret and what information won't be secret. Now in America, we have a president who's elected. We have congressional committees that do oversight of the intelligence community. We have a huge compliance machine of literally thousands of people. In the NSA, the compliance is not only the NSA Inspector General, but the Department of Defense Inspector General, and a team from the Department of Justice, and a review committee that reports directly to the President. That's not to say it's perfect, but here's a single individual who's working, not even for the NSA, he's working for a private company, says, "I'm going to declassify all these secrets. I don't care, and I'm going to take a lot of secrets and take them with me to Hong Kong, which is part of China, and I'm going to go to Russia." I don't think he had those rights, or no more than the character Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment.
So what about his background did you find interesting?
Well, Snowden, let me go back a step. When I investigated Lee Harvey Oswald, I found, friends of his from high school. I found friends of his from the Marine Corps. I found friends of his from workplaces. I found about 87 people who spoke to me, became part of my book. With Snowden, it was the exact opposite. Yes, he dropped out of high school in his first year. I couldn't find any people who really could say anything about him. I couldn't find anyone in the military. That was because new privacy laws made it very impossible.
He was in the military.
What?
He was in the military.
He was in the military for about 4 months, yeah. And
why did he leave?
Well, he says he left because he injured his feet in a parachute jump, maybe, I don't know. But he got an administrative discharge, which says that he wasn't fit for the military. He then joined the CIA, and here I had more information about him, because basically what happened to him in the CIA is he began violating their rules by different forms of hacking into computers. And they basically said that unless you resign, we're going to start an investigation of you, which basically would destroy him, even if they found he was innocent of what was charged. So he resigned from the CIA, and in the NSA, he was looking at even his postings on the internet. He was a very unhappy employee.
What's the difference, the brief difference between the CIA and the NSA?
The CIA is a foreign intelligence service. The NSA has two missions. One is to protect all American communications, internet and telephone and every other communication, government communications. The second started out as code breaking, but has evolved into basic intercepting of all electronic communications, the entire spectrum, wherever they are. And it basically is the queen on the chessboard, because all the other American intelligence services and our allies depend on the NSA to verify what their spies might have found out, or what they might have found out by different means, through intercepting some phone conversation or some internet communication or some telemetry. So the NSA is basically, let's just say in this regard, it's a super spy agency. It's limited to foreign intelligence. It is not supposed to do any surveillance on Americans, persons in America.
CIA.
No, well, the CIA is also limited, that it's not supposed to do America. But the NSA and CIA are both limited. The FBI can do investigations anywhere.
From your knowledge, how much money does this country spend on intelligence with all the 17 different intelligence agencies?
Well, Snowden published budgets, going to 2012. It's, I would say, you couldn't be wrong with a guess, $10 billion. It might be much greater than that, depending on how you define homeland security, intelligence, everything. But, maybe $10, $20 billion, a lot of money. It's secret how much we spend, I should say. Secret from me.
That's the black budget?
It's a black budget. I mean, which means, of course, that how we deal with government secrets is they're not secret from Congress. As Congress appoints two committees. This is since 1978, since the Church investigation, House and Senate, permanent subcommittees, which have the classifications necessary to look at the black budgets. But yes, they're secret from the public.
I want to divert for a couple of minutes. I want to go back and show you some video of the last time I saw you, when you did a book on Arm & Hammer and you were here for an interview. And here is 1996 in December, just a bit about Edward J. Epstein. What do you do for a living?
I'm an author. I've written 12 books now.
What are the kinds of things you've written about over the years?
Well, I've written books on, I have to say, conspiracy and intrigue. I've written on the Kennedy assassination, the CIA, the KGB. I've also written books about business. I have a Rise and Fall of Diamonds, a book about Mike Milken and the takeovers and mergers and acquisitions. And I've written books about the media.
What year did you do News from Nowhere?
News from Nowhere was my PhD thesis at Harvard. So the investigation, where I sat in a different network, was done 69 to 71. I think the thesis was finished 72 or 73, and I think it was published in 74.
What year did you graduate from Cornell?
Well, I graduated from Cornell 1964, although there was I left for a few years, so I graduated late. But yeah,
What's the story of you working for Nabokov, or Nabokov, depending on how you pronounce it, the author of Lolita?
That goes back a long way to when I was a freshman at Cornell, a sophomore. I was actually a sophomore. I was taking his class, and he asked me if I would like to go to the movie theaters and give him a short review. There were 4 movie theaters in Ithaca, this was at Cornell, and tell him what was playing, because he only had time, he and his wife Vera only had time to see one. So I had this temporary job. You know, we're talking now 60 years ago or something. It's a long time ago.
What do you remember about him the most?
I remember all his lectures, because he was such a dynamic lecturer, and I remember the way his wife, when I would come into his office to give my reports on the movies, Vera, would never turn to me, but to keep just looking at her husband, and I would stand there talking from behind her, and only once did she turn and look at me, and that was when I said something very stupid about the movie Queen of Spades. I still regret saying it, and I admit it was incredibly stupid. When I said it reminded me of Gogol, and he got very interested, because obviously he was trying to make or thinking of some connection, and he asked me why, and then I honestly replied, because they're both Russian. And I could see his face drop, and she looked at me like, what kind of idiot are you?
You said back in 1996 it was your 12th book. This is called How America Lost Its Secrets, about Edward Snowden. What number is this?
I think it's number 15 or 16. It depends on whether I count shorter books or longer books, but I think it's my 15th long book published by a publisher.
Personal question. Have you been able to make enough money over the years writing books to survive?
Yes.
Or did you have to do other things along the way?
No, I mean, I like doing other things. I was an expert witness for a law firm, O'Melveny and Myers in Los Angeles, when I was, after I wrote 2 books about Hollywood, and I enjoyed that enormously. I have done other things. I've written columns for Manhattan Inc. and for Slate on different subjects, business and Hollywood. But no, I have supported myself through my books.
Still live in New York City?
I still live in the same apartment that you visited me in New York City when you were taking photographs for your book.
That was a long time ago. I took photographs of all the authors that we had on in the book. Anyway, let's go back to the Snowden story. And here is Oliver Stone and a clip of him talking, and then I'll ask you what your interaction was with him and why.
At the age of 29 years old, what he did is stunning to me, because no matter what you think of him, it takes tremendous courage to turn your back on a life that's spoiling him. He's good money, good job, good position, and on top of it, he has a rented home in Hawaii. He's on the go-to list. He gets to Maryland at one point, and he's making more money than he's ever made. And he felt strongly, as a Boy Scout does, that they wrote this Constitution in blood. They meant it. Right. These guys were not joking around. It's not some old piece of paper. It's a Constitution. He said to me, I pledged my loyalty to that Constitution, not to the NSA, and that's a good point to make. The NSA has its own set of laws, and he broke those laws. But his law, he never broke his oath to that Constitution, and many of the courts have supported that because they said it has been unconstitutional.
What did you think about his movie, Snowden?
Well, I think Oliver Stone is a very interesting and a very good filmmaker. I thought in Snowden, he basically did what he does in his movies. He does his movies of fiction. Unlike Laura Poitras's documentary, this is a fictional portrayal. Even when he does the reenactment of Laura Poitras's movie, Citizen 4, where we have the movie, anyone could see it, it's on the internet, he adds scenes to her movie. Scenes like, for example, which Snowden destroys his computer or his computer drive in front of Laura Poitras and Glenn Greenwald. Well, of course, as she filmed it all, we would have seen it in a movie if it was in a movie, but it's not in a movie. So he adds scenes, and if you ask him about it, or people ask him about it in the Q&A after his movie, he said, this is fiction. And it is fiction. And he's entitled, once he labels it fiction, he's entitled to make the movie as he likes. I think the one thing I do like about his movie, and the reason I recommend it, is it best encapsulates the false narrative of Snowden. He did spend a lot of time with Snowden. He paid $1 million, or his film company paid $1 million to the lawyer Anatoly Kucherena to give him access not only to Snowden, but as he told me, to block the access for a competing movie that was going to be made by Sony and MGM. So he did have access. He did get Snowden's story. But again, if you accept Snowden's story, case closed. And, Snowden gives a story in which he supplied no information to anyone but journalists. That is contradicted by even Russians, and it's basically, I don't think, true. So it's not that I don't believe Oliver Stone's movie, it's that I don't believe Snowden.
You mentioned early in the interview, I want to ask you, how much of this is tied to a group of people that all kind of reinforce each other? When you go back to Nick Lemon, who used to run the Columbia Journalism School and is an author and wrote it was a negative review of your book, front page, New York Times, on a Sunday. And Bart Gellman, who got some of the documents and got a Pulitzer Prize. And Charlie Savage, who did a long piece, he's a New York Times reporter in the New York Review of Books. They all, and then you throw Oliver Stone in, they all seem to think about the same thing, and you're the first one to come along to give another side to it. How much of that is all tied to Nick Lemon used to oversee the Pulitzer Prizes, and these things matter to people who are journalists?
I wouldn't include Nick Lemon, because basically he's, as a reviewer, this is what he felt, okay? But the others, I think, do fit into a certain circle, a Snowden circle, where I think they have staked their reputations on what Snowden says. And it strikes me it puzzles me that the same people, journalists in America, that embrace the findings of U.S. intelligence that the Russians were behind the hacks of the Democratic National Committee and other hacks that influenced the election, that while they would accept these findings, they reject the same findings, all of which are in the House Select Committee report, completely. Not to mention, of course, reject my book, because what I'm saying is the entire book says one thing: the conventional wisdom about Snowden is wrong. It's based on a single source. It's based on Snowden. He's not only a self-interested party, but the Russians now have an interest in creating the myth of Snowden. They've given him a global platform, and now he's someone who tweets about Russia. Well, not about Russia, but about American surveillance from Russia. So I think that there is a commitment. It's a commitment, not a political commitment, but a commitment to received wisdom of the press.
I want you to put this into context. This is from July of 2015, in the middle of the presidential campaign. It's our now president, Donald Trump.
Yeah. What would you do about Snowden? I think he's a total traitor, and I would deal with him harshly. And if I were president, Putin would give him over. I would get along with Putin. I've dealt with Russia.
You think you'd get along with Putin?
I think I'd get along with him fine. I think he'd be absolutely fine. He would never keep somebody like Snowden in Russia. He hates Obama. He doesn't respect Obama. Obama doesn't like him either. But he has no respect for Obama, has a hatred for Obama, and Snowden is living the life. Look, if I'm president, Putin says, hey, boom, you're gone. I guarantee you that.
Anything?
Well, what President Trump is saying is that Putin did not, unlike other spies who got caught or leakers who got caught, he didn't face a court process. He didn't face justice. Instead, he basically went to an adversary nation and took the benefits of going there. I don't use words ever like traitor. They're legal concepts. I do believe that Snowden betrayed secrets that he had signed his oath to protect. He might have thought that he was above the law. The Constitution said he was above the law. In Crime and Punishment, the character Raskolnikov believed that he was above the law, that there's a moral duty that goes beyond the law. Whatever he believed, he betrayed secrets which basically blew a large part of the war on terrorism and blew all the sources that the NSA and the Department of Defense, because there were 900,000 military documents, all the sources, they believed, rightly or wrongly, that he had compromised. Because once a source is compromised, you have to kill it and find some ways of replacing it. So he did enormous damage. I don't even know if his supporters say that he did no damage. They say he did enormous good. That's their view. And maybe he did some good, because he started a national conversation and he opened up a subject of interest. But I think where Trump is certainly right is that this man has not faced justice, and he deserves to face justice, whatever will be decided. I mean, a jury acquitted O.J. Simpson. They might acquit him. I don't know.
You had cameras following you around when you went to Moscow, when you went to Hong Kong and Japan and all that. Who were they, and what's going to happen to that material?
Well, two very talented filmmakers are making a documentary about me. They've completed it. They actually, as fate may have it, begin the documentary with your 1996 interview of me. But in any case, in the documentary, they wanted to see how I went about my investigation. So yes, they followed me around at certain parts of my trip to Japan, to Hong Kong, to Moscow. So, and
where are we going to see this?
Well, they have to arrange distribution. It's not my film; it's their film. I'm just an actor in a film about myself.
What do you think will happen to Edward Snowden?
That's a good question, and I wish, of course, I can only say that I hope that he is treated well in Russia, because he's now a Russian asset. I do not think the Russians would ever return him to America, even if Donald Trump gave him a pardon. I don't think they would return him, because he knows too much. In the intelligence game, it's not what you know, it's what your opponent doesn't know you know. And he would certainly be debriefed in a very intensive way if he returned to America. And he would say what he actually did tell the Russians, and that would help us. So I don't think he will come back, and I hope the Russians don't do anything to eliminate him.
One small side story that you tell in here, you taught me something I didn't know, and if you watch Russia Today, which you can here in the Washington area, there's a program called Sophiko. And I had no idea until I read your book that woman has a famous grandfather?
Yes, Edward Shevardnadze. This is Sophie Shevardnadze, whose grandfather was the Russian foreign minister and president of Georgia, a very distinguished person in the Cold War. And she's, I found her very, I spoke to her because I felt her interview with Kucherina, which was 10 weeks after Snowden had came to Russia, and was the last interview with Kucherina. After that, he shut up. I was the only journalist that he saw after Sophie Shevardnadze, at least that I know of. And so because in this interview, which is before the narrative took on this extra that he destroyed all his information, because before this they had not spoken on that subject, and Snowden himself had emailed a former U.S. Senator Humphreys that
Gordon Humphrey.
Yes, Gordon Humphrey.
I wanted to ask you that there's no explanation of what you've got him in the book a couple of times. How did he get into this? He's a Republican from New Hampshire.
He had apparently shown some support for Snowden, and Snowden, as in the book, Snowden emailed him back from Moscow saying that that the intelligence that he had was secure, whatever that meant. So, but even there, he didn't say I destroyed everything. He said it's secure in his communications. So, at the point that Sophie, if you don't mind me calling her by her first name, that's what she calls herself, that Sophie interviewed Kucherina, and it was a wide-ranging interview about his personality and everything else. It wasn't on this subject. It wasn't a hard-hitting interview. She asked him just about whether he had given all his documents to journalists. And he said no. He made it very clear to her. He only gave them some, as I said earlier. And then she asked him, rather surprised, she said, so he still has undisclosed documents? And Kucherina answered, certainly, which is the reason I flew to Moscow to see Kucherina. And
he's a Russian. Kucherina.
Yes, he's a Russian lawyer, a friend of Putin's, a friend of he's the client of Putin's. He's the lawyer for Putin's political party.
Where does Snowden get the money to pay for his lawyers?
Where did Oliver Stone get the money?
No, Snowden.
Oh. There are different versions. Eventually, Snowden says he saved up the money and brought it with him in cash with him to pay for his time in Russia. Well, you know, if you carry a lot of cash on airplanes, you suddenly and you've stolen a lot of secrets and have external hard drives and things like that, you're taking a risk. But that's what Snowden says. What Kucherina told me, he said, I asked him that same question. He said he has no money. He's absolutely broke. He needs money. Kucherina was speaking in Russian, so I'm giving my interpretation. He desperately needs money, and if you want to send him some money, I'll provide you, for his defense committee, I have to say, I'll provide you with wiring instructions. And then, a third possibility is that since he's a defector to Russia, and since it's traditional to pay defectors, we certainly do, that the Russian government is paying for his apartment, his bodyguard, and whatever other facilities he needs. He has a broadcasting studio, his own broadcasting studio, in his home, his apartment, wherever he lives. No one knows where he lives, by the way. Not Oliver Stone doesn't know. And Oliver Stone got about as close to him as anyone.
We're out of time. There's a lot more in this book. It's called How America Lost Its Secrets. Edward Snowden, the Man and the Theft, and our guest has been Edward J. Epstein. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian, for a great interview.